Chapter 1. The last thing I remembered from my previous life was the pale glow of my phone in the dark. I had promised myself I would sleep early. I always did, and I always failed. Just one more chapter, I had thought, scrolling lazily with half-closed eyes. The web novel was addicting in the worst way. Predictable, dramatic, impossible to stop. Righteous heroes, tragic backstories, world-ending villains. The usual. I had reached the part where the demon lord awakened. A nameless boy was dragged onto an altar, offered as a human sacrifice to break the ancient seal. The demon lord emerged, slaughtered everyone present, and crushed the boy's throat before he could even scream. Cruel, I had thought absently, more annoyed at the lazy writing than disturbed. Then there was a blinding light, a screech of metal, impact. Pain exploded through my body, sharp, absolute, final. And then, nothing. Pain dragged me back. Not the dull ache of a headache or sore muscles, but something raw and burning, as if my nerves had been peeled open and left exposed. My wrists throbbed. My shoulders screamed. Every breath scraped like broken glass. Cold seeped into my skin from beneath me. Stone. I was lying on stone. My eyes snapped open. At first everything was a blur. Darkness fractured by flickering orange light. The air was thick and heavy, choking with the smell of smoke, damp earth, and something metallic that made my stomach lurch. Blood. Panic surged through me so violently I almost gagged. I tried to push myself up. Chains clattered. The sound rang out, harsh and echoing, swallowed by a vast empty space. I froze. Slowly, so slowly, I lifted my head. Iron shackles encircled both of my wrists, biting deep into swollen skin. Dried blood crusted around the edges where the metal had cut through. Thick chains extended from them, bolted into the stone beneath me. My mind refused to process what I was seeing. This wasn't possible. I wasn't in my bed. I wasn't in a hospital. I wasn't anywhere that made sense. I was lying on a raised stone platform carved with symbols that pulsed faintly with a dull red glow. The patterns twisted like living things, crawling across the surface beneath me, sticky with something dark. More blood. My blood. My breath came faster, shallow and ragged. Where was I? A low murmur drifted through the air. Voices. I jerked upright as far as the chains allowed. Figures stood in a wide circle around the altar, half hidden in shadow. They wore dark robes embroidered with strange symbols, faces obscured by deep hoods. In their hands were talismans, ritual daggers, staffs carved from bone. No one looked at me. Their attention was fixed on the center of the platform. On me. Cold terror flooded my veins. This wasn't a hospital. This wasn't a kidnapping. This looked like... No. A memory surfaced, unwanted and crystal clear. An altar. Robed figures. Human sacrifice. My stomach dropped as realization slammed into me with brutal force. The novel. I had been reading it just before I died. A human offering use to awaken the sealed demon lord. A nameless boy whose throat was crushed in an instant. My vision tunneled. No, this couldn't be happening. I tried to speak, but my voice came out as a broken rasp. Help. No one reacted. They continued chanting, voices low and rhythmic, the words harsh and guttural. A language I didn't know, yet somehow understood. Each syllable vibrated through the air, pressing against my skull, my chest, my bones. Fear tightened like a vice around my lungs. I don't belong here, I croaked, louder this time. You've got the wrong person. A robed figure stepped forward. For one wild second, hope flared. Then he raised a dagger, not toward my chains, toward my chest. I thrashed instinctively, the movement sending white-hot pain shooting through my shoulders. The chains held firm, digging deeper into torn flesh. Stop, please. The chanting grew louder, drowning out my voice. The symbols beneath me began to glow brighter, red light spilling across the stone like spreading fire. Heat rose from the altar, scorching through the thin fabric of my clothes. Something deep below rumbled. The ground trembled. Dust rained from the cavern ceiling. And suddenly I understood with sickening clarity. They weren't killing me. Not directly. I was the key. The sacrifice that would break the seal. Terror unlike anything I had ever known seized me. In the novel, the boy didn't even get to scream before the demon lord killed him. That had been fiction. Distant. Entertaining. Now it was my reality. I don't want to die, I whispered, voice shaking uncontrollably. The rumbling intensified. Cracks spiderwebbed across the stone floor beyond the altar, glowing with the same hellish red light. A gust of wind erupted from nowhere, extinguishing several torches at once and plunging the chamber into deeper shadow. Then the temperature dropped. Not gradually. Instantly. Frost crept across the stone, thin crystalline patterns spreading outward from the center of the altar. My breath fogged in the air. The blood beneath me chilled, sticky and cold. The chanting faltered. Fear seeped into the robed figures' voices. Something was wrong. Something was waking. A deafening crack split the air. The symbols beneath me flared so brightly I had to squeeze my eyes shut. A pressure descended on the chamber. Immense, suffocating, like the weight of an ocean pressing down from above. My ears rang. My heart stuttered. Instinct screamed at me to run, to hide, to disappear. But there was nowhere to go. A sound rose from the depths below. Not a roar. Not a scream. Something older. Something vast. The stone directly in front of the altar fractured with a thunderous boom. Darkness poured out. Not shadow, something thicker, denser, alive. It spilled across the floor like liquid night, swallowing light and warmth as it spread. The torches dimmed. The air grew heavy, suffocating. The robed figures staggered back, some collapsing to their knees. Couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. From within that abyss, something stirred. A silhouette formed, tall, impossibly so, rising slowly as if gravity meant nothing. Long hair drifted around him, weightless in the churning darkness. Robes darker than the void itself clung to a lean, powerful frame. Beautiful, terrifying, inhuman. Then his eyes opened. Crimson. Not glowing, burning, like embers buried under ash. They swept across the chamber with cold indifference, pausing briefly on the trembling cultists before settling on me. The pressure doubled. Every instinct in my body screamed predator. This was the moment. In the novel, this was where the demon lord crushed the sacrifice's throat. My death was seconds away. I didn't want to die. Not like this. Not alone. Not as a nameless extra in someone else's story. Without thinking, without meaning to, I whispered the name I remembered from the page glowing on my phone in the dark. Mo Schwanya. Silence fell. Absolute. The darkness stilled. Even the air seemed to stop moving. Those crimson eyes snapped back to mine. For the first time, something other than apathy flickered in them. Shock. The figure stepped forward. Each movement was slow, deliberate, heavy with restrained power. The darkness parted around him like a living cloak, revealing pale skin untouched by time, sharp features carved with cruel elegance, and eyes that held centuries of cold fury. He stopped at the edge of the altar, close enough that I could see the faint pulse of veins beneath his skin, close enough that I could feel the killing intent rolling off him in suffocating waves. A hand rose, long fingers tipped with black nails extended toward my throat. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for pain, for darkness, for the end. Nothing happened. Seconds dragged by. Tentatively, I opened one eye. His hand hovered inches from my skin. Not touching, not crushing, just suspended. Confusion twisted through his expression, subtle but unmistakable. "Why?" he said softly, voice low enough to make the air tremble. "Do you know my name?" My mind went blank. I hadn't meant to say it aloud. Had I? Panic clawed at my chest. I. No words came. His gaze sharpened, searching my face with unnerving intensity, as if trying to peel me apart layer by layer. Behind him, one of the robed figures stammered, Sovereign, the offering is prepared." Mo Schwanya didn't even look back. A flick of his sleeve. The speaker exploded into a spray of blood. Screams erupted. The remaining cultists dropped to the ground, trembling violently, foreheads pressed to the stone. I stared, horror-stricken, unable to process what I had just witnessed. He had killed that man as casually as brushing dust from his sleeve. Slowly, impossibly gently, his hand shifted. Instead of crushing my throat, his fingers touched the chain at my wrist. The metal snapped like brittle glass. The sudden release sent a jolt of pain through my arm, and I gasped. He broke the other shackle just as easily. I should have run. I couldn't move. My body refused to obey. His gaze never left mine, as if I were the only thing in existence. Strange warmth seeped into my frozen limbs, chasing away the bone-deep cold. The wounds on my wrists tingled, the bleeding slowing, skin knitting together before my eyes. Healing. He was healing me? Why? I should kill you, Emoshwanya murmured, almost to himself. My heart lurched. But his fingers hovered near my cheek, not quite touching, as if testing an invisible boundary. You feel familiar. Familiar? We had never met. I would remember someone like him, unless a chill ran down my spine. Unless this body had. His expression darkened slightly, something dangerous flickering beneath the surface. Tell me, he said, voice soft in a way that felt far more terrifying than shouting, who you are. My throat tightened. I don't know. That was the truth. The body I inhabited wasn't mine. The boy who had originally lived here was gone. Erased, replaced by a stranger from another world. His eyes narrowed. A lie would have been safer. Honesty felt suicidal. Before he could speak again, another voice cried out from the floor, trembling with desperate courage. Sovereign, please spare us. We have fulfilled the ritual exactly as instructed. Emoshwanya turned his head slightly. The pressure in the room spiked. Exactly, he repeated softly. The word carried a weight that made my stomach twist. Darkness surged. Screams cut off abruptly. When I dared to glance past him, the cultists were gone. Not dead, not unconscious. Gone. Erased as if they had never existed. Silence settled over the chamber, thick and oppressive. It was just the two of us now. My heart pounded so loudly I was certain he could hear it. Emoshwanya studied me for a long moment, eyes unreadable. Then he spoke. From this moment on, he said calmly, you will remain by my side. My breath caught. What? What? His gaze sharpened, faint irritation flickering across his features, as if my confusion were inconvenient. You awakened me, he said. Your life belongs to me. That was not how sacrifices worked. Sacrifices died. They didn't get recruited. 1,000 questions screamed through my mind, but none made it past my lips. He turned away, robes sweeping across the blood-stained stone like liquid shadow. Come. I didn't move. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else. He paused, glancing back over his shoulder. For a heartbeat, those crimson eyes softened, barely, almost imperceptibly. Then his expression closed again. Do not make me repeat myself. The air trembled. Terror jolted through me, finally forcing my body into motion. I scrambled off the altar, nearly collapsing as numb legs failed to support my weight. Somehow I managed to stay upright. Every instinct screamed that following him was a terrible idea. The alternative felt worse. Step by step, I moved toward the abyss he had emerged from. The darkness parted obediently, revealing a descending path carved into the earth, lit by ghostly blue flames that flickered without heat. Emoshwanya did not look back again. As I crossed the threshold, leaving the blood-stained chamber behind, a single thought echoed through my mind. In the novel, the sacrifice died here. Instead, I was being taken with the demon lord himself. I didn't know whether that meant I had been saved, or condemned to something far worse. Chapter 2: Demon Realm. I had no idea how long I walked. The path twisted down through the cavern, faintly lit by flickering blue flames that cast more shadow than light. My wrists, once bound in chains, now ached as if remembering the pain, though nothing touched them. The air was cold but not freezing. It smelled of stone and something faintly metallic, like blood that had long since dried. Behind me, I felt it, his presence. Heavy, impossible to ignore. Every breath I drew was shared in some way with him, as though the darkness itself had a heartbeat, and it beat in sync with mine. I tried to speak once. I don't understand. Where are we going? My voice was a trembling whisper, swallowed almost immediately by the cavern walls. No answer. The silence was suffocating, but I didn't dare look back. Not yet. Not until I understood what I had just survived. We emerged into a vast hall that defied reason. It stretched impossibly in every direction, with ceilings high enough to disappear into shadow. Pillars of black stone twisted upward like frozen flames, and the floor gleamed as though polished by centuries of devotion. At the far end, a throne sat elevated on a dais, and behind it, shadows pooled like ink in the corners, though I could feel movement in them. And at that throne sat Emoshwanya. He was colossal, almost unreal in scale, taller than any man I had ever seen, and yet graceful, every movement deliberate. His crimson eyes scanned me once before returning to the darkness beyond. "Sit," he commanded, voice calm and impossibly deep, vibrating through my chest. I froze. "Sit," he repeated. My legs shook as I obeyed. The stone beneath me was cold, the air thick with power. I realized, then, that I could feel it, his power, like a tangible weight pressing against my skin. My entire body tingled, almost painfully, from the intensity of it. I swallowed. I'm Lin Qinghe, I said softly. The name felt strange, alien in my mouth, and yet, it was mine now. My old self, my modern life, my memories. They were all gone, leaving only this strange, impossible existence. He raised an eyebrow but said nothing. A long silence stretched between us, one that felt like centuries. I couldn't look away from him, couldn't stop noticing the small details. The curve of his jaw, the way his fingers rested lightly on the armrest, the subtle tension in his shoulders that betrayed centuries of restraint. "You survive," he said finally. The words were low, almost thoughtful. Most would have broken by now. Most would have screamed and died. I read it in a novel," I stammered, heart hammering. I knew what would happen to me." He leaned forward slightly, his gaze sharpened. "A novel?" I nodded, unsure if I should explain. It told the story of this place. Of you. Of the sacrifice. You kill the boy in the book. I was supposed to be him." The corner of his mouth twitched. Not a smile. Not quite. Something sharper, colder, more amused. "Most humans fear what they cannot change. You do not." I swallowed hard. I'm scared," I admitted, voice trembling. "I'm terrified of you, of this place, of dying." His crimson eyes softened, just a fraction, but enough to make my chest tighten. "Good," he said softly. "Fear keeps you alive, but do not misunderstand. Fear does not mean obedience, only respect, and you will learn it quickly." I nodded. My throat was too tight to speak. He rose then, the motion fluid and impossible. I noticed for the first time the subtle weight of power in his step, the way the shadows seemed to bend toward him, not from malice, but as if recognizing their master. He came to stand before me, and the heat from his presence made the cold hall feel almost warm, in a twisted way. "From now on, you are mine," he said, voice calm but undeniably commanding. "You will not be killed, not by me, not by anyone, but you will obey my rules. Understand?" "Yes," I whispered. The word sounded tiny in the vast space. He extended a hand. "Come. I will show you your quarters." My legs felt like lead. Every instinct screamed to run, to flee, to collapse to the floor. But I obeyed because I had no choice. We walked in silence through halls that seemed endless. Tapestries of black silk, embroidered with crimson threads, told stories I could barely comprehend. Battles, rulers, monsters, some clearly older than the novel I had read, some older than I could even imagine. Eventually, we reached a set of doors carved from obsidian stone. He pushed them open, revealing a room surprisingly simple compared to the grandeur outside. There was a large bed, draped in dark linens, and a desk cluttered with scrolls and strange instruments. Blue flames floated along the walls, illuminating everything in a soft, ghostly glow. "This will be your room," he said. "It is not luxurious, but it is safe. Your body will be healed in time. You will eat, sleep, and train. That is all for now." I stared at him. "Train?" He smirked slightly, the first expression I had seen that hinted at amusement. "The world you came from is weak. Here you will learn to survive, or die trying. That choice, for now, remains yours." I swallowed, nodding again. My mind was spinning, trying to process everything. The chains, the altar, the darkness, the demon lord him. And yet, something else was there. Something I couldn't name. A strange warmth. A pull toward him I didn't understand. As he turned to leave, he paused. "Do not touch anything that is not yours," he warned. "Do not wander beyond the boundaries I set. And do not speak of this place to anyone else. If you survive, it will only be because you obey." I nodded, voice barely audible. "Yes." He left. The doors closed with a resonant thud, leaving me alone. I sank to the floor, finally allowing my knees to buckle. The enormity of what had just happened hit me in waves. I was alive. I had survived the demon lord. And now, I belonged to him. My fingers traced the chains that were gone but left their memory in my skin. I shivered. What had I gotten myself into? Outside, the cavern hummed softly, like a beast breathing in sleep. And somewhere, deep within the shadows, I could feel him watching, waiting, always present. I didn't know whether to be terrified or grateful, and a small, foolish part of me wondered, if survival meant staying by his side, what did that make me? The first night in the demon realm passed without sleep. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint sound of movement in the corridors beyond. Every now and then, the shadows shifted, reminding me that I was never alone. By dawn, I had made one decision. I would survive. Not because I understood this place or him or the forces at play, but because I had to, and because something about him called to a part of me I didn't even know existed. A part that would not let me turn away. Chapter 3: Shadows and Steps. The morning in the demon realm was not like any dawn I had known. Blue flames floated along the walls of my chamber, fading and brightening in an impossible rhythm, like breathing. No sun, no sky, only stone, shadows, and the faint metallic tang of the air. I sat on the edge of the bed, hands clasped, knees pulled close, trying to figure out what to do with the rest of my life. That thought, rest of my life, sounded absurd. Life here didn't feel like it had a normal passage. Every breath carried weight. Every sound felt like a warning. And I could feel him, Emoshwanya. Even in my solitude, even with doors closed, I could sense him moving through the palace. Not always near, but close. A presence like shadow and fire combined, pressing against me, making me feel simultaneously safe and terrified. I stood, pacing slowly across the polished floor. My bare feet made almost no sound. The room was large, surprisingly bare for someone of his power. A desk cluttered with scrolls, a small bookshelf filled with old, strange tomes, a single wardrobe, and the bed I'd claimed by default. I didn't touch anything. Not yet. Every instinct told me, don't. A soft sound made me freeze. Footsteps. I had no idea what time it was, or even how many hours had passed. But the steps were deliberate, measured, not hurried. Familiar. Lin Qinghe. The voice, low and smooth, vibrated against the stone walls. My stomach twisted. I turned slowly. There he was, Emoshwanya. Not the terrifying, unapproachable figure of the ritual. Not the nightmare I had expected. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, crimson eyes studying me. "You've been awake a long time," he said. Voice calm, yet with that weight I couldn't ignore. I couldn't sleep, I admitted, heart hammering. There's a lot to process. He pushed off the frame and stepped closer, each movement precise, measured. Shadows clung to him, twisting like dark silk. His presence was overpowering, yet there was a restraint I hadn't noticed before. Processing, he repeated, tilting his head slightly. Tell me what you see here. I swallowed. Stone, torches, blue flames, my bed, desk, scrolls, wardrobe. His eyebrow arched slightly. And how do you feel? I hesitated, terrified, and alive. The corners of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but something sharper, almost dangerous. Good, he murmured. Fear is survival. Remember that. But alive does not mean safe. Only vigilant. I nodded, shivering, unsure whether I was relieved or more frightened. He came to stand behind me, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from him. The palace is vast. You must not wander alone. Even corridors appear empty, but shadows are unpredictable. I glanced at him, unsure whether to ask the obvious. Are you not like the novel? He stiffened, eyes narrowing. What do you mean? The novel, you killed the sacrifice. You didn't spare anyone. My voice was almost inaudible. I read it. I knew what would happen. But you didn't. For a heartbeat he was silent. I felt it, a shift in the air. His shoulders relaxed slightly. Then he leaned closer, low enough that only I could hear. I do not follow stories, he said quietly. Reality is different. You are different. Different. I swallowed, unsure whether I should feel relief or terror. Why? I asked. Why spare me? His crimson gaze met mine, intense, impossible to read. Curiosity, he said softly, and interest. Interest. The word struck me harder than any threat ever could. I blinked. I don't understand. You will, he murmured, stepping back. Patience is a virtue you must learn. And so is observation. Watch carefully. Speak cautiously. Move wisely. I nodded again, the weight of the instructions pressing down like a tangible force. He tilted his head, studying me with those impossible eyes. You surprise me. Fearless where most would crumble. Clever where most would panic. And yet you are fragile. Fragile. The word stung, though I wasn't sure why. I'm trying, I whispered. His gaze softened just slightly, enough that my chest felt tight. Try harder. For your sake. And for mine. I swallowed. His words felt like a challenge, but also a promise. Hours passed. I explored my chamber carefully, touching nothing. I read the tomes, puzzled by the symbols. Some were maps. Some were histories of battles that predated the novel I had read. Some were spells, instructions for rituals, cultivation methods, lists of demonic sects and their leaders. I couldn't process most of it. Still, I felt the pull of knowledge, the need to learn, to survive. And I kept thinking of him. Late in the afternoon, though time was meaningless here, he appeared again. This time he did not lean against the doorway. He moved with purpose, gliding through the room until he stopped in front of the desk. He picked up a scroll, glanced at it, and then set it down. Then his gaze found me. You have questions, he stated, more than asked. Yes, I admitted, heart hammering. Where are we? How does the palace work? And you? Who are you really? He exhaled softly. I am Emoshwanya, demon lord of this realm. Those who oppose me do not live long. Those who serve me prosper if loyal. And those who disobey disappear. I nodded slowly, swallowing my fear. And me? He studied me for a long moment. You survive, because I allow it. Because you are useful. And because I choose it. Useful. Choice. The words burned. I realized then that survival here was not about strength. It was about understanding him, understanding the rules, and somehow navigating a world where one misstep meant death. Will I ever be free? I asked, the question tasting bitter in my mouth. He didn't answer immediately. His gaze flicked to the distant shadows, unreadable. Freedom is a concept humans cling to. Here, loyalty is survival and survival is choice. You will learn. I nodded again, silently promising myself I would learn. Somehow. Days passed, or maybe it was weeks. Time moved strangely in the demon realm. I trained lightly, reading old tomes, observing the palace, trying to understand the rules. Emo Xuanye rarely spoke to me during the day. But at night, he would appear, silently watching as I moved about my chamber or practiced basic exercises. Sometimes he would offer a correction, not often, just enough to remind me that he was present, always observing. And each time, I felt that strange pull, fear and fascination tangled together, impossible to separate. One night, I caught him staring more closely than usual. Our eyes met, and for a heartbeat, I felt it. The faintest trace of amusement, curiosity, interest. He turned away before I could say anything, but the moment lingered. My heart still thudded in my chest hours later. I realized, with a strange mix of horror and excitement, that I was beginning to understand him, and perhaps, in some twisted way, beginning to care. Chapter 4: Shadows of Affection. The palace never slept. Even when the blue flames dimmed in the corridors, I could feel the pulse of power thrumming through its stone veins, an invisible heartbeat that kept every shadow alive. It whispered at the edges of my mind, reminding me I was not truly alone. That presence, Emo Xuanye, was everywhere, subtle yet oppressive, like the weight of the night sky pressing down. I rose from the bed that morning with the strange mixture of fear and fascination that had settled in my chest over the past few days. My body ached from the light exercises he had forced me to do, stretches, balance, movement, and meditative practices. None of it seemed to tire him. His own display of skill the day before had left me frozen in awe, heart hammering, limbs trembling. But today was different. The doors to my chamber opened silently, as though anticipating my movement. He stood there, robes flowing around him, hair cascading over broad shoulders, crimson eyes sharper than any blade I had ever seen. "Today," he said softly, "you leave this room." I froze, stomach nodding. "Leave? Where?" He stepped forward, hand outstretched. "Follow me. Observe, learn, and survive." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to run, retreat back into the safety of the chamber. But the fear in my chest was tempered by curiosity, and, unreasonably, the pull of his gaze. I obeyed. The corridors of the palace were labyrinthine, twisted with purpose. Stone pillars carved with strange runes stretched up into shadows I couldn't see the end of, and tapestries depicting battles older than memory hung like silent sentinels. The air was thick with magic, raw and tangible, pressing against my skin like the first breath of a storm. "Where are we going?" I asked, trying to steady my voice. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glided ahead, each step silent, measured, leaving me to follow in awe. Finally, he stopped at a massive gate made of blackened steel, etched with sigils that pulsed faintly red. "Beyond this gate is the trial of shadows," he said. "You survive it, you learn. You fail, you die." I swallowed. "Trial of shadows?" He glanced back at me, expression unreadable. "A test. A lesson. A warning. This realm does not forgive weakness." The weight of the words pressed down on me. I felt my chest tighten, heart hammering. And yet, a strange thrill stirred within me. The first real sense that I might be more than a helpless sacrifice. The gate opened with a rumble that made my knees tremble. Beyond it was a vast chamber, darker than anything I had seen before, the air thick with a faintly metallic taste. Shadows clung to the walls and floor, alive, moving independently of light. Figures formed in the darkness, twisted and monstrous, their eyes glinting faintly like coals. "Do not fear the shadows," Emo Xuanye said, voice calm yet impossible to ignore. "Fear is the tool. Control it, and you may live." I nodded, though I wasn't sure if I believed him. My legs shook as I stepped forward, the floor cold beneath my bare feet. Immediately, the shadows lunged. They weren't alive in the conventional sense. They were malleable, moving as if extensions of some unseen will. I dodged instinctively, body moving in ways I didn't know I could. A shadow swiped at me, long black tendrils, and I barely rolled to the side, feeling cold wisps brush against my arm. "You must anticipate," Emo Schwanya's voice intoned from behind me, calm and commanding. "Do not react. Predict." I swallowed hard, forcing my mind to focus. The shadows shifted, coiling, stretching. I remembered the exercises he had drilled into me: balance, awareness, movement. Heart hammering, I tried to anticipate the next strike. It worked. I dodged a sweeping tendril, then another. My body moved as if guided by instinct, limbs striking in short bursts, pushing against the shadows without touching them directly. They recoiled, hissed, and reforming, testing me, probing my resolve. I was sweating, trembling, terrified, but alive. After what felt like an eternity, Emo Schwanya stepped forward. Shadows froze instantly, curling away from him as though afraid to touch his presence. His eyes found mine, and for the first time I noticed approval. "You survived the first trial," he said softly, voice carrying weight I could feel in my bones. "Few do." My chest heaved. I did." "Yes," he said simply. "But you are far from complete. Shadow is not your enemy. Fear is your weapon if you learn to wield it. Do not forget this." I nodded, still catching my breath, every muscle trembling from adrenaline. The rest of the day passed in a blur of lessons and observation. He watched me silently, intervening only when necessary, correcting my stance, my breath, the smallest detail. Each time our hands brushed, intentionally, unintentionally, I felt a spark I couldn't name. My heart raced, my thoughts scattered, yet I couldn't look away from those crimson eyes. At one point, I stumbled. A tendril of shadow brushed my ankle. Pain shot up my leg, and I fell forward. Before I could even cry out, a hand shot out, strong, warm, steady, catching me. "Do not fall," he murmured. The word lingered, heavy with meaning. Not an order, not exactly, more like a warning, a reassurance, a tether. My chest tightened, and I realized my body had been leaning toward him without thinking. He held my gaze for a heartbeat too long, then released me. "Focus," he said, "or next time you will not be caught." I nodded, cheeks burning, aware of how close he had been, aware of how his gaze lingered longer than it should have. By the end of the day, I was exhausted. My body ached, my mind reeled, yet a small ember of pride burned within me. I had survived. I had learned. And somehow I had noticed the small moments, the way his eyes softened briefly when I succeeded, the way he allowed me to struggle before intervening. And I realized with a start I wanted to see more of those moments, even if it terrified me. Night fell, though again there was no sun. The blue flames dimmed and pulsed faintly, bathing the chamber in ghostly light. I sat on the edge of my bed, nursing bruised arms and scraped knees, when the door opened silently. Emo Schwanya entered. "Do not think I will not test you further," he said quietly, voice low, carrying the weight of centuries. "You have survived, yes, but endurance is only the beginning." I swallowed, nodding. "I understand." He moved closer, eyes flicking over the bruises and scratches on my arms. "You are resilient," he murmured, almost softly, and for a heartbeat, the world shifted. The air between us thickened. His presence pressed closer, warmer than I expected, his crimson gaze lingering on me. I couldn't move. "Resilience," he said again, voice low, almost intimate, "is attractive." My stomach twisted. I wanted to laugh, cry, run, all at once, but no sound came. A faint smirk tugged at his lips, dangerous, teasing, and I realized something I hadn't expected. He was testing me in more ways than one. Physically, mentally, emotionally. I was caught utterly and completely, and I knew, with a sinking thrill, that I would follow him anywhere. Chapter 5: The Night He Stayed. If the trial of shadows had been meant to frighten me, it succeeded. If it had been meant to break me, it failed. But what it truly did was something far more dangerous. It made me curious, not about the shadows, about him, Emoshwanya. The days that followed blurred together in a rhythm that felt almost domestic. Not peaceful, nothing in the demon realm could ever truly be called that, but structured. Predictable in the way storms were predictable. You knew they would come, you just never knew how violent they would be. Morning began with meditation. Not gentle breathing exercises like I remembered from my previous life, but something harsher, forcing my mind to hold still while demonic energy scraped against it like sandpaper. The first time I tried, I nearly blacked out. By the third day, I could last several minutes without trembling. By the seventh, I realized something horrifying. I was getting used to it. Emoshwanya rarely praised me. In fact, he almost never did. But he watched, always watched, and sometimes, only sometimes, his gaze would linger a fraction longer, as if measuring something invisible. Today was one of those days. Again, he said quietly. I exhaled slowly, sitting cross-legged on the cold stone floor, hands resting on my knees. The blue flames around the chamber flickered in response to my breathing, shadows stretching and shrinking like living things. Demonic energy seeped toward me, cold and sharp. It hurt, not physically, not exactly. It felt like pressing ice directly against the soul. My instincts screamed to pull away, to run, to reject it. But I didn't, because he was watching, because I wanted to prove something. To him, to myself. I inhaled slowly. The energy entered my body like liquid frost. My back arched, breath hitching, vision flashing white. And then a hand pressed lightly against my shoulder. Warm, steady. Everything stabilized instantly. I gasped, eyes snapping open. Emoshwanya knelt beside me, his palm resting against my shoulder blade. Not forceful, not restraining. Simply there. Too fast, he murmured. His voice was low, close enough that I could feel it rather than hear it. Demonic energy must be coaxed, not seized. You are not conquering it. You are allowing it to enter. I know, I managed, though my voice shook. His fingers tightened slightly, not painful but grounding. No, he said softly. You do not. The contact sent warmth spreading through my back, down my spine, into my limbs. The icy energy settled, no longer tearing through me like glass shards. For a moment, neither of us moved. I became acutely aware of everything. The heat of his hand, the faint scent of smoke and something darker, the steady rhythm of his breathing. Felt safe. The realization startled me so badly I almost broke the meditation again. You rely on instinct, he continued, voice quieter now. Instinct will keep you alive in battle. But here, instinct will destroy you. Then what should I rely on? I asked. Silence. Then, after a long moment, on me. My heart stopped. Not metaphorically. Actually stopped. Then restarted with a violent thud. I turned my head slightly, meeting his gaze. His crimson eyes were calm, steady, unreadable. But there was something beneath them. Something ancient, possessive, certain. As if the statement had not been an offer, but a fact. Training continued. Movement drills, balance exercises, reaction tests that bordered on cruelty. Sometimes he would attack without warning, not to injure, but to force my body to respond before my mind could freeze. I fell often. He caught me every time, never roughly, never hesitating, just there, like gravity. By the time the blue flames dimmed toward evening, I was exhausted beyond reason. My arms trembled just from pushing myself upright. My hair clung damply to my face, my clothes sticking uncomfortably to my skin. Emoshwanya, of course, looked untouched, not even slightly winded. I glared at him. He tilted his head. You are displeased. You don't sweat, I said weakly. A pause. Then, unbelievably, the faintest curve touched his lips. I do, he replied. It simply takes more than this. Was that teasing? The thought hit me harder than any training blow. You're mocking me, I accused. I am stating a fact. You're enjoying this. Another pause. Perhaps. I stared at him, stunned. Was the demon lord actually joking? The world had officially lost all logic. Later, after I had cleaned up and changed into the simple robes provided for me, I expected him to leave as usual. He didn't. Instead, he moved to the desk in the corner of the chamber, picking up a scroll and unrolling it with casual familiarity. I blinked. You're staying? I often work here, he said without looking up. Why? That made him pause. Slowly, deliberately, he lifted his gaze to meet mine. Because this is where you are. The room felt suddenly too small, too warm, too charged. I looked away first, heart racing for reasons I did not want to examine. Silence settled. Not uncomfortable. Not exactly peaceful either. Just quiet. The scratch of brush against parchment. The soft flicker of blue flames. My own breathing, gradually slowing as exhaustion pulled at me. I climbed onto the bed, intending only to rest for a moment. Sleep took me instantly. I woke to darkness. Not the ambient glow of the flames. True darkness, thick and suffocating. Panic surged. Had something happened? Was this another trial? Then I felt it. Warmth. A steady presence beside me. My vision adjusted slowly, revealing a faint outline sitting at the edge of the bed. Emoshwanya. He hadn't left. He was simply sitting there, watching. You're awake, he said quietly. My throat felt dry. What time is it? Late. That's not helpful. You slept for several hours. I pushed myself upright, wincing as my muscles protested. Why didn't you go back to your own chambers? Silence. Long enough that I thought he might ignore the question. Then, I wished to ensure your condition stabilized. You mean you were worried? I do not worry. Concerned, then. Another pause. Perhaps. I stared at him, trying to read his expression in the dim light. He looked different. Less like the untouchable ruler of a demonic realm and more like something quieter. Lonelier. A thought slipped out before I could stop it. Have you done this before? His gaze sharpened. Done what? Stayed with someone while they slept. The air changed. Not violently, just enough to feel like stepping onto thin ice. No, he said at last. Something in my chest twisted. Then why me? This time, the silence stretched so long I wondered if I had crossed a line. Finally, he stood. Even in the darkness, his presence filled the room. Because you are mine to protect, he said softly. Not possessive. Not gentle. Just absolute. And somehow that was worse. I should have been afraid. Maybe I was. But underneath the fear was something warmer. Something fragile and terrifying. Because no one had ever said that to me before. Not like that. Not as if it were the most natural truth in the world. Go back to sleep, he said. Will you still be here? Another long pause. Yes. I lay down slowly, turning onto my side, facing away from him. Not because I wanted distance, but because I didn't trust my expression. My heart was beating too fast. My thoughts were too loud. Behind me, I could hear the faint rustle of fabric as he resumed his seat. He didn't move again, didn't speak, just stayed. And for the first time since waking in this world, I fell asleep without fear. I dreamed, not of my old life, not of the ritual, but of standing in an endless field of dark flowers under a silver sky. A shadow moved beside me. Tall, silent, protective. I never saw his face, but I knew it was him. When I woke again, pale light, or what passed for it here, filtered through the high windows. Emoshwanya was still there, exactly where I had left him. Not asleep, watching. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, very softly, "Good morning." The words sounded strange coming from him. Unpracticed, almost human. I smiled before I could stop myself. "Good morning." Something flickered in his eyes. Something dangerously close to warmth. And in that moment, I realized something that should have terrified me. I was no longer just surviving here. I was beginning to belong. For a long time after that quiet "good morning," Neither of us moved. I didn't know what to do with myself, because something had changed. Not in the palace. Not in the realm. In us. Emoshwanya had always been overwhelming, powerful, distant, untouchable. A storm you watched from afar, knowing you would be destroyed if you stepped too close. But last night, he hadn't been a storm. He had been warmth. And that realization was far more dangerous than fear. "You should eat," he said at last. The spell broke. I blinked, suddenly aware of my dry throat, the faint ache in my stomach. Food in the demon realm was inconsistent. Sometimes elaborate banquets appeared, sometimes nothing for days. I had learned not to question it. A tray now sat on the low table beside the bed, steaming bowls of something that smelled surprisingly normal. Rice, broth, sliced meat, vegetables that looked suspiciously like lotus root. "Did you arrange this?" I asked. "I did. You didn't have to." A pause. "I know." That answer did not make my heart behave. We ate in silence at first. Not awkward, just quiet. He did not sit across from me like a host. Instead, he took the chair slightly to the side, angled toward me as if unconsciously guarding the room. I tried not to stare. Failed. He noticed, of course. "You are distracted," he said without looking up. "You stayed all night," I blurted. He stilled, then slowly set his chopsticks down. "Yes. Why?" His gaze lifted, crimson eyes steady, ancient, impossible to escape. "I already answered. You said I was yours to protect. And that is insufficient?" "It's—" I swallowed. "A lot." Silence fell again, thicker this time. Then, unexpectedly, he spoke more softly. "In this realm, attachments are weaknesses. Most rulers avoid them. Most demons exploit them. Then why? Because you are not a weakness." The certainty in his voice struck deeper than any blade. "You are—" He paused, as if searching for a word he did not use often. "An exception." My chest tightened painfully. Before I could respond, something changed. The air shifted. Not violently, subtly, like pressure dropping before a storm. Emoshwanya's head turned sharply toward the far wall, eyes narrowing. "Stay here," he said. Alarm shot through me. "What's wrong?" He rose in a single fluid motion, power rolling off him like heat from a furnace. "We have visitors." Visitors. In the demon realm. That could not be good. The palace did not tremble. It recoiled. I felt it. The structure itself reacting, shadows tightening along the walls, flames flaring brighter in warning. Something foreign had entered a place that did not welcome intrusion. Emoshwanya walked toward the door, movements calm but lethal. "Do not leave this room," he said without looking back. "Wait," I said, panic spiking. "What if? They are not here for you." That was not reassuring. "Then who?" He paused at the threshold. "For me." And then he was gone. The silence he left behind was unbearable. I lasted exactly 30 seconds. Then I followed. The corridors outside felt different, charged, hostile. Demonic guards moved swiftly, shadows pooling around them like weapons drawn. None stopped me. None even looked at me directly. That terrified me more than anything, because it meant they had been ordered not to. Meaning Emoshwanya knew I might follow. Meaning he had allowed it. Why? I reached the grand hall just as the doors slammed open with a thunderous boom. 3 figures stood at the center of the chamber. Human, radiant, blindingly out of place in the oppressive darkness. My stomach dropped. I knew them, not personally, from the novel. The hero, the heroine, and the righteous sect leader who guided them. They were supposed to confront Emoshwanya much later in the story. Not now. Not while I was still weak. Not while I was— A cold hand wrapped around my wrist. I gasped, whipping around. Emoshwanya stood behind me, eyes blazing, expression darker than I had ever seen. "I told you to stay," he said quietly. I'm sorry, I just—" His grip tightened, not painful but firm enough to anchor me. Then, in one smooth motion, he pulled me behind him, shielding me completely from the hall. "You should not see this," he murmured. But it was too late. Demon Lord, the hero's voice rang out, clear and righteous. Release the souls you have bound and surrender. Your reign ends today. Emoshwanya laughed. Not loudly, not dramatically, softly, coldly. You crossed half the continent to deliver threats? Light flared as the heroine stepped forward, sword blazing with spiritual energy. We came to end the suffering you have caused. How noble, he said flatly. I could feel the rage simmering beneath his composure. Not explosive, but controlled, terrifying. The sect leader's gaze swept the hall and landed on me. Recognition flashed in his eyes, then shock. You, he breathed. You are the sacrifice child. Impossible. Emoshwanya moved. Not forward. Closer to me. His arm came back, one hand resting lightly against my shoulder, anchoring me behind him. Possessive. Protective. A silent declaration. This matter does not concern you, he said, voice dropping to something lethal. Leave. Now. The hero's expression hardened. You would protect a human? He is under my protection. The words echoed through the hall like a verdict. My knees nearly gave out. Step aside, the hero demanded. We will not harm an innocent. Emoshwanya's laughter returned, sharper this time. Innocent? He repeated. You break into my domain, threaten my people, and speak of innocence. Light surged. Shadow surged. The air screamed as opposing forces collided. Couldn't breathe. Power pressed against my lungs, my skin, my bones. Too much, too vast. My vision blurred, knees buckling. The last thing I felt was arms catching me. Warm, steady, familiar. Foolish. Emoshwanya murmured close to my ear. You cannot endure this. Darkness swallowed everything. When I woke, I was back in the chamber. Safe. Alone. No, not alone. Emoshwanya sat beside the bed, one hand still lightly gripping mine as if he had not moved since bringing me here. His eyes lifted immediately when I stirred. You are awake. My throat felt raw. What happened? They retreated. Retreated. I croaked. You fought them. A faint shadow crossed his expression. They were not prepared, meaning he had held back. For me. You shouldn't have come, he said quietly. I was worried. The admission slipped out before I could stop it. Something flickered in his gaze. Sharp, bright, dangerous. Why? Because I swallowed. You stayed with me last night. Silence fell like a dropped curtain. Then, slowly, his fingers tightened around mine. You are troublesome, he murmured. Sorry. Do not apologize. He leaned back slightly, studying me with that intense, unreadable focus. They will return, he said at last. Stronger. With allies. Fear curled in my stomach. Then what do we do? His gaze did not waver. You will grow stronger. And you. A pause. I will ensure you survive. Not we. You. You could just let me go. I whispered. The effect was immediate. The temperature in the room dropped. Shadows lengthened. His grip tightened enough to hurt. Do not say that again. I swallowed. Why? Because I wanted to hear it. Needed to. His eyes burned like coals. Because I will not. My breath caught. Not now, he continued softly. Not ever. He released my hand abruptly, as if realizing how tightly he held it. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he stood. You need rest. Will you stay? The question slipped out, small and vulnerable. He froze. Back to me, shoulders tense. Seconds passed. Then, yes. Relief flooded me so intensely I almost laughed. That night, sleep came slowly. Not because of fear, because of awareness. Of his presence at the bedside. Of the steady rhythm of his breathing. Of the fact that the most terrifying being in this world had chosen to remain beside me instead of ruling his domain. At some point, I turned onto my side, facing him. In the dim light, his expression was unreadable, but softer than I had ever seen. Emoshwanya, I whispered. Yes. Why me? A long silence followed. So long I thought he would not answer. Then quietly, because when I looked at you on that altar, you did not look at me with hatred. My chest tightened. You looked at me as if I were lonely. The word landed like a falling star. And you did not look away, he finished. I didn't remember doing that, but somehow I knew it was true. Are you? I asked softly. Another long pause. Then barely audible. Not when you are here. Something fragile broke open inside my chest. I reached out before I could overthink it. My fingers brushed his sleeve. He went utterly still. I almost pulled back, until his hand closed over mine. Carefully, gently, as if I were something breakable. We stayed like that for a long time. Not speaking, not moving, just there. Two people who should never have met. Holding on anyway. Chapter 6: The Truth the World Refused to See. I realized too late that the original story had lied. Not by accident. By design. It began 3 nights after the battle in the sky. The palace had returned to its uneasy quiet, but something beneath it had shifted. The guards moved differently, less confident, more alert. The shadows themselves seemed to listen, stretching toward distant sounds like hunting animals scenting blood. And Emoshwanya, he had not left my side. Not once. You should be resting, I murmured. He stood near the window, arms folded, crimson eyes fixed on the endless darkness outside. He had taken to standing there for long stretches, as if watching something only he could see. I am. That is not resting. Silence. Then, without turning, if I sleep, I will not sense them approaching. A chill slid down my spine. Approaching? I echoed. You mean the hero's party? Yes. Just one word. But it carried centuries of certainty. I pushed myself upright despite the lingering pain in my side. They already retreated. Maybe they won't come back. Emoshwanya finally turned. The look in his eyes made my breath catch. They will. Why are you so sure? His jaw tightened. Because they did not come to defeat me. The air in the room felt suddenly heavy. Then why did they come? A long pause. Then, to measure me. The words struck something buried deep in my memory. A scene. A line from the novel. The hero kneeling over the fallen demon lord, smiling coldly as he extracted a glowing core from his chest. Your cultivation will serve humanity better than you ever did. My blood ran cold. They want your core, I whispered. Emoshwanya stilled. Slowly, dangerously, he walked toward me. Explain. I hadn't planned to tell him. Not yet. Not ever, maybe. But the image of that scene, his body broken, the hero triumphant, the world praising a lie, made my stomach churn. In the story I read, I said quietly, they didn't defeat you in open battle. His eyes sharpened. They poisoned the spiritual veins beneath your palace, using a formation disguised as a peace seal. The room went deathly still. They lured you into suppressing it yourself, I continued, voice shaking. And when your power was drained, they struck from behind. Silence. Absolute. Total. The kind of silence that exists right before something explodes. Behind, Emoshwanya repeated softly. Not angry. Not shocked. Just a very quiet. Yes. And they killed me. Yes. Another pause. Then, and you know this because? Because I watched it happen. Because I cried over a fictional character's death. Because I woke up in his world. But none of that would make sense. Because the story was written from their perspective, I said instead. They were called heroes. You were called a tyrant. His expression didn't change, but the shadows around him did. They began to coil slowly, like serpents awakening. Of course, he murmured. Something in his voice broke my heart. Not anger, not even bitterness, just weary inevitability. I don't believe it, I said quickly. I mean, I believe the events happened, but not the way they described. You never attacked them first. You never even left your realm. His gaze snapped to mine. You noticed that. I've been here, I said softly. You don't act like someone obsessed with conquest. You act like someone guarding something. For a moment, something fragile flickered across his face. I was guarding peace, he said quietly. A fragile one, bought with isolation. My throat tightened, and they shattered it. Suddenly, everything made sense. The training, the vigilance, the refusal to leave me alone. You knew, I whispered. You were preparing for this all along. Yes. Then why didn't you tell me? He stepped closer. Too close. Because you were not meant to be involved. I already am. His hand came up, not touching me, just hovering near my face as if he wanted to confirm I was real. That is precisely the problem. Something in my chest twisted painfully. Why? I asked. His eyes burned. Because you are the only thing in this world I cannot afford to lose. The words hit harder than any confession. No hesitation. No ambiguity. No metaphor. Just truth. I trained you, he continued, voice low and raw. Not to make you stronger for my sake, but so you would have even the slightest chance of surviving what is coming. My vision blurred. You were preparing me to live without you. Silence. Then barely audible. Yes. The thought was unbearable. I don't want that. You do not have a choice. I do. Before he could react, I grabbed his sleeve. His entire body went rigid. I'm not leaving you to die alone, I said fiercely. Something dangerous sparked in his gaze. You presume I would allow that. I presume you don't get to decide everything. The shadows in the room surged violently. Not threatening, just emotional, as if reflecting his turmoil. For a long moment we simply stared at each other. Then, slowly, he covered my hand with his. Warm, careful. You are reckless, he murmured, and unbearably stubborn. You like that. A pause. More than I should. The attack came that night. Not on the palace. Beneath it, a pulse of corrupted energy shot through the ground like lightning, rattling the entire structure. I nearly fell from the bed as the floor shuddered violently. Emo Shuanya's expression went ice cold. They have begun. The formation? Yes. Without another word, he turned toward the door. I grabbed his arm. Wait. His eyes flashed. You cannot follow. I know where the core node is. He froze. Explain. In the original story, the formation had 3 anchors, I said rapidly. 2 decoys and 1 true source. If you destroy the wrong one, it detonates and drains your power instantly. His grip on my shoulders tightened. And you know which is real. Yes. A long, terrible silence. Then, you will stay behind me, no matter what happens. I nodded. We both knew I wouldn't. The underground cavern felt like stepping into a grave. Corrupted light pulsed from massive pillars etched with glowing runes. The air thick with poison so potent it made my lungs burn with every breath. Figures stood waiting. The hero, the heroine, the sect leader, and dozens of elite cultivators. They had expected us. So you came, the hero said, smiling faintly. Up close, he looked nothing like the righteous figure from the novel. His eyes were cold, calculating, hungry. We knew you wouldn't ignore the threat to your precious domain, the heroine added, gaze flicking to me with open disdain. And the sacrifice lives. How useful. Emo Shuanya stepped forward, placing himself between us without even looking back. Leave, he said flatly. The sect leader chuckled. You misunderstand. We are not here to negotiate. Spiritual chains erupted from the formation, slamming into Emo Shuanya from all directions. Even he staggered slightly under the sudden drain. My heart stopped. This was it. The moment from the novel. Now! The hero shouted. Energy gathered in his blade. Not righteous light, but something twisted, greedy, designed not to purify but to extract. To harvest. Left pillar! I screamed. Emo Shuanya didn't hesitate. Even restrained, he moved, shadows lashing out like whips, obliterating the correct anchor in a single strike. The formation shattered. Backlash exploded outward. Screams filled the cavern as cultivators were thrown back, their own trap turning against them. The hero's attack faltered. his expression twisted with fury. You! Pain slammed into my back. White-hot. Blinding. I looked down in disbelief to see a blade protruding from my chest. The heroine stood behind me, face calm. Collateral damage, she said coolly. Your usefulness has ended. My legs gave out. Strong arms caught me before I hit the ground. Emoshwanya. His hands were shaking. Actually shaking. No, he whispered. The cavern trembled. Shadows roared to life, devouring light, sound, everything. You dared, he said softly, voice breaking, to touch what is mine. Not loud, not dramatic, just absolute. Power erupted from him in a wave so vast it felt like the world itself was collapsing inward. Cultivators screamed as their defenses shattered like glass. The hero staggered back, eyes wide with something dangerously close to fear. This isn't possible. Emoshwanya rose slowly, still holding me, eyes burning with something beyond rage. If he dies, he said quietly, there will be nothing left for you to protect. I forced my hand up, gripping his robe weakly. Don't. His gaze snapped down. Stay with me, he demanded hoarsely. Don't. Destroy everything. Tears slid down his face. He didn't seem to notice. You would still protect them? He whispered. No, I'm protecting you. Something shattered. Not violently, softly, like a heart breaking open. Cruel, he murmured. You are unbearably cruel. But the power around him steadied, focused, controlled. Instead of annihilating everything, targeted only our enemies. Precise, merciless, final. When the cavern finally fell silent, only 3 figures remained standing. Emoshwanya, me, and the hero barely alive staring in horror. Monster, he rasped. Emoshwanya's expression was utterly empty. No, he said calmly. Merely someone who learned what you truly are. He turned away, dismissing him as irrelevant. Because the only thing that mattered was me. Back in the chamber, he refused to let anyone else touch me. Not healers. Not attendants. No one. He held me as if letting go would erase me from existence. You will live, he said over and over, voice raw. You must. Dark energy flowed into me. Not corrupting, not consuming, but stabilizing, sustaining, saving. You said, demonic energy hurts humans? I whispered weakly. It does. Then stop. No. For once, there was no room for argument. I will bear any cost. When the bleeding finally slowed, exhaustion claimed me. The last thing I felt was his hand in mine. Clinging. Not possessive. Desperate. Chapter 7. The World After You Stayed. When I woke, the first thing I felt was warmth. Not the suffocating heat of demonic energy. Not the sharp ache of injury. Just warmth. Solid. Steady. Alive. For a moment, I didn't open my eyes. I simply existed inside that feeling, floating in a softness I hadn't known since arriving in this world. Then I realized something strange. My hand was trapped. Not painfully, carefully, as if someone had been holding it for a very long time and refused to let go. I opened my eyes. Emoshwanya was asleep beside the bed. Not in a chair. Not at a distance. Half leaning over the mattress, his head resting near my arm. Long dark hair spilling across the sheets like ink. One hand was wrapped around mine, fingers loosely interlaced, as if even in sleep he feared I might disappear. I stared, because I had never seen him asleep before. Without the weight of power, he looked younger. Not harmless, nothing about him could ever be harmless, but human in a way that made my chest ache. There were faint shadows beneath his eyes. He had not rested. Not truly. Not until now. Carefully, I shifted my fingers. His grip tightened instantly. Crimson eyes snapped open. For a split second, there was no composure, no distance, only raw panic. You're awake. His voice was hoarse. Relief flooded his expression so openly it made my throat tighten. Good morning, I murmured. He didn't answer. He just stared at me, as if confirming I was real. Then, slowly, His free hand came up and hovered near my face before brushing lightly against my cheek. Warm, gentle, reverent. You returned, he said quietly. I told you I would. Silence. Then, suddenly, he leaned forward and pressed his forehead against mine. Not dramatic, not forceful, just close. Close enough that I could feel his breath, uneven and fragile in a way I had never imagined possible. Do not leave me again. Not a command. A plea. Something in my chest broke open. I wasn't planning to, I said softly. That is insufficient. I blinked. What? His hand tightened around mine. Stay. The word carried 1,000 unspoken things. Stay alive. Stay here. Stay with me. Stay mine. I am staying, I said. He shook his head slightly. No, not like this. Before I could ask what he meant, he pulled back just enough to meet my eyes. For once, there was no restraint in his gaze. No distance. No carefully controlled composure. Only truth. I love you. The words fell into the room like a stone into still water. No hesitation. No metaphor. No poetic disguise. Just simple, devastating honesty. My brain stopped working, because I had imagined this moment, dreamed about it, feared it, but nothing could have prepared me for the way he said it, as if it were both a confession and a surrender. I do not understand when it began, he continued quietly. Perhaps the moment you looked at me without hatred. Perhaps when you chose to stay. Perhaps when I realized I would rather destroy the world than lose you. My heart hammered painfully against my ribs. Emo Shwanya. You are my weakness, he said. My peace. My restraint. My reason not to become the monster they believe me to be. His fingers trembled slightly. If that frightens you, say so now. I will release you. I will not force you to remain. But we both knew it. He would let me go physically, but it would break him. I reached up and touched his face. He went utterly still. You're an idiot, I said, voice shaking. His brows drew together slightly. Explain. You think I stayed all this time because I was scared of you? Silence. Then, almost cautiously, no. I stayed because I didn't want you to be alone. Something shattered in his eyes. I love you too, I whispered. Not loudly, not dramatically, just truth for truth. He froze, completely, as if he had stopped breathing. Say that again. His voice was barely audible. I love you. The reaction was not what I expected. He didn't smile, didn't pull me into a dramatic embrace. Instead, he lowered his head slowly until his forehead rested against my shoulder. His grip on my hand tightening, as if he were anchoring himself to reality. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then I felt it. His shoulders shaking. Not sobbing. Not even crying loudly. Just quiet, uncontrollable tremors. Like someone who had endured too much alone for too long and no longer knew how to contain relief. Dangerous, he murmured hoarsely. You are unbearably dangerous. Why? Because now I have something I cannot lose. When he finally lifted his head, there was something new in his expression. Not softer, stronger, certain. He leaned closer, hesitating for a fraction of a second. Just enough to give me time to pull away. I didn't. His lips brushed mine. Gentle, careful, as if I were made of glass. The kiss deepened slightly, warm and unhurried. Nothing like the consuming power he wielded in battle. Felt like a promise rather than a claim. When he pulled back, his gaze searched mine anxiously. Are you in pain? I laughed weakly. You just kissed me, not stabbed me. Good. News spread through the demon realm faster than fire through dry grass. By evening, everyone knew. Not because we announced it, because Emo Shwanya refused to let go of my hand. Walking through the palace beside him felt surreal. Demons who had once avoided looking directly at me now dropped to one knee as we passed. Heads bowed in respect. Not fear. Respect. What is happening? I whispered. You are acknowledged. As what? He glanced at me, expression calm but eyes warm in a way only I seemed to notice. As mine. My face burned. That is not a title. It is the only one that matters. At the grand hall, things escalated. When we entered together, still hand in hand, an audible gasp rippled through the assembled court. Emo Xuanye ignored them completely. He led me straight to the dais. Then, in full view of everyone, he pulled me gently to stand beside him. Not behind. Beside. This realm stands because of him, he said calmly. He prevented the formation that would have destroyed us. He restrained me when I would have annihilated everything. His will is my will. Silence fell like a hammer. Any who disrespect him, he continued softly, disrespect me. No one doubted the consequence. One by one, the entire court knelt. Not to him, to us. Later, back in the quiet of the inner gardens, I finally exhaled. That was terrifying. You handled it well. I didn't do anything. You stood beside me. His tone suggested that was everything. We sat together beneath a tree that glowed faintly with silver leaves. The air calm, peaceful in a way the demon realm rarely was. For a while we just existed. Then I glanced at him. You look different. He raised a brow. Different how? Lighter. A pause. I feel lighter. I smiled. Try smiling. He frowned. Why? Because you're happy. Another pause. Then, awkwardly, uncertainly, he tried. It was small, unpracticed, but breathtaking. My heart did something embarrassing in my chest. See? Not so hard. It feels strange. You'll get used to it. If it pleases you, I will. Days passed. Peace settled gradually, like dust after a storm. Emo Xuanye still ruled. Still terrifying. Still absolute. But he laughed sometimes now. Quietly. Only with me. He slept beside me instead of at the bedside. He learned to hold my hand without checking if anyone was watching. And, when he thought I wasn't paying attention, he would simply look at me. Not with intensity, not with calculation, just contentment. One evening, as we watched the dim horizon together, he spoke softly. You changed everything. I didn't do anything special. You stayed. He intertwined our fingers, lifting our joined hands slightly as if grounding himself in the reality of it. That was enough. I leaned against his shoulder. Do you regret it? Never. Even if the world still fears you, let them. His head tilted slightly until it rested against mine. As long as you do not. I closed my eyes, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. For the first time since entering this world, I felt no tension, no fear, no sense of waiting for something terrible to happen. Just peace. Emo Xuanye? Yes. I'm glad I didn't die on that altar. His arm tightened around me, pulling me closer. So am I. Above us, the endless dark sky of the demon realm shimmered faintly, almost like stars trying to break through. For the first time, it didn't feel oppressive. Felt vast, full of possibilities. A world that had once seemed like a prison had become something else entirely. A home, because he was in it. And in the quiet that followed, with his hand warm in mine and his presence steady at my side, I understood something simple and profound. The story had not been about defeating a demon lord. It had been about saving a lonely man, and somehow saving myself too.